If you're at 9.3, you have the ability to turn it more than 180 degrees. My favorite fun little tip, because it's easy and it's something nobody ever thinks of. You got to be smart, test it when there's no people around, take responsibility for yourself and your own actions, okay, America? What's up, people? So today I wanted to go over 5 great tips from a racing driver to any street car drivers or new drivers out there that are just going to make your day a whole lot brighter driving a car. And the things we're going to talk about are super basic, but we're going to break them down in a way that is pretty profound because there's so much that can be found in the little things. And in racing, that's where you find all the gains. That's where you find your speed, your consistency, and your safety. It's all those little tiny details. It's not just a car and an engine and tires. It's how everything interacts and sets up, and that's what frankly makes race cars fast and gets around the track. But there's a lot of wisdom in there that can translate to anybody from a 16-year-old who's first learning to drive or your grandmother. So obviously you got to do all the basics: safety, getting your seatbelt on, making sure you're ready to go. But the things we're going to talk about have to do with you as an individual and like a bio machine interacting with the car. So we're going to break this down into 5 areas. 1, the steering wheel. 2, the shifter. 3, the pedals. 4, your seat and your position of your body to all those things. And then lastly, visibility and being able to see. Because if you can control the car and you can sense the world around you and you can see, only then are you going to drive the car the best and ultimately enjoy your time and be the safest. So let's start off with seating position. That's the first one. And I know that sounds super basic and boring, but listen up. Now, it goes without saying that everybody is a little different. There's tall people, there's short people, there's and every shape in between, okay? But generally speaking, we got a couple things going on. 1, you got to be able to reach the steering wheel. 2, you got to be able to push the pedals, and you got to be able to do it effectively. And 3, you got to see out. Your seat is your ability to do that. And actually, if you'll forgive me, I'm gonna put the windows down here because it's a little stuffy in here, and I didn't want to have the AC blowing because I figured that would screw up the audio. So, first thing, you got to be close, you got to be 2 feet back, and trucks, you're going to sit up higher, the pedal's going to be down. In a sports car like this, you're going to sit back a little bit more. But generally speaking, the way you interface with the steering wheel is always going to be the same. So let's just start off with the steering wheel and your arms. Now, the first thing I can point out really easily, and I'm going to illustrate by putting the seat a long, long way back, is if your arms are straight, you don't have the ability to control the car the best, which I'm going to illustrate by turning it. When you're way out here, you're at the ends of your arm's travel and you don't have your torque on it. It actually becomes more tiring to steer it like that. And if I have to lean up off the seat like this to grab it or pull myself up, that's not efficient either. We'll talk about hand position on the wheel a little bit later. So one thing that has to happen is you need to be close enough that your arms are the most efficient to work on the steering wheel. And generally speaking, the best way to describe that is you want a natural bend at your arms when your hands are rested at 9.3, just holding on easily. By having a little bit of a bend, when you turn the wheel the whole way around, you have the finesse and power to be able to actually let your arms do the natural flexing like this as the steering wheel turns in that progression. So maybe here they're straighter, maybe here they start getting a bit more bent. If I get myself too close to the steering wheel, and I'm going to illustrate by getting way up here like a little grandma in Florida, which I don't mean in any negative way, but you guys know what I'm talking about. You see these people driving like this. This isn't effective because I can't turn the wheel effectively here. This is what people will do when they don't have the strength and they need a lot of torque, which is actually kind of interesting because if you watch NASCAR racing, those guys actually sit rather close to the steering wheel, presumably because they need the torque. So there is value sometimes to having that sort of thing going on, but to show you, my arms are very, very bent and I'm quite close to it. And if you guys remember that video of me driving the dune buggy or the sand rail the other day, I kept hitting my seatbelt latch and popping it loose because it sits rather close and my arms kept brushing. So in this circumstance, if I turn the wheel all the way, my arms are, first of all, I'm crowded up on my body like this, and I'm digging my elbow literally into my abdomen and my belly here. And I can't turn it quite as well. So inevitably, if I sit very close to the steering wheel, I end up needing to do this shuffle sort of thing, and I know we can talk about techniques of steering, which we'll get to in a minute, but I don't have as effective turning ability on the wheel in case I needed to avoid something or do a quick maneuvering. It's just too close. So you got to find that nice median zone, which generally can be thought of as having your arms have a bit of a nice bend. Just don't have it so far back that you're way out here like this. You don't have good control, okay? And you don't want to be so close that you're uptight and you start hindering with your own body and getting into that circumstance. So obviously, we're all going to be different shaped. I mean, you guys aren't going to be my exact body type, so you're going to have to find the happy median and the compromise for everything going on here that works for you. But just keep that in mind. You want to have a gentle bend in your arms like this so that you can efficiently steer the wheel all the way, putting the amount of torque you need on it, the amount of finesse, but there's nothing getting in the way of you efficiently controlling your steering wheel. Now, beyond that goes into the pedals. Now, it goes without saying that if you have a manual transmission car, you got a little bit more to do with the pedals. You got a clutch you got to push in and out all the way. But what I'm going to say is still just as valuable and important for somebody with an automatic transmission. Now, naturally, in an automatic transmission, the vast majority of people, as the way they teach it too, will only be using their right foot to accelerate or brake, not both at the same time. Of course, if you're more of a racing driver or a sporty driver, you might get into left foot braking just because you can do different techniques and things like that. That's really not important for us to talk about right here, right now, but how close you are to the foot box comes into this. And I also want to take a moment to talk about the difference of a lot of cars and sports cars and how the relationships of where the steering wheel is and the angles of them don't work for anybody, or you wonder in that country if people are kind of a different height or proportions, because they don't necessarily work for a lot of people, which is kind of interesting to look at when you look at the history of cars. Because there are countries, you know, European countries, England or Italy, that if you buy a car that's pre-war or even 1950s, you know, a taller person nowadays is not going to fit. So it's interesting to think about that. But anyway, with regard to the clutch, the easiest way on a manual transmission car to see if you're doing okay. First of all, I'm in a pretty good position for my arms here, right here. I'm a little crowded, but this, I'm up here to where I could get a little racy, okay? Or, you know, be efficient on the steering wheel. But when you push in the clutch, you should be able to push in the clutch without stretching your foot all the way like this, you know, stretching a little bit, and push it all the way in that your leg can still freely move on the seat and is not binding. If I move this far enough back like this, and forget about what my arms are right now, and let's just think about the leg. When I push this in, my leg is pushing forcibly into the seat, and my foot, I'm having to push it with my toe. This is not ideal, because when my extremity gets so far out like that to the end, one, I lose the torque and the power, so it becomes a little bit more effort, and it's also difficult for me to get it in all the way, and I have to really kind of poke it with my toe to get all the way there. And when your leg is like this, you're using effort to squish into the seat. And I can brake and throttle reasonably well here, but I just don't have good control. So you don't want to be that far back. You want to be in a position where, as you're driving along, I've got my left foot on the dead pedal. And as a note, the Dodge Viper that I've done some of these videos on has no dead pedal. So I have to physically hold it above the clutch pedal without pushing the clutch pedal, or stick my foot down underneath the pedals. Not ideal. But in this circumstance, I have a dead pedal, and I would venture to say that 95% of you watching with your car has a dead pedal to the left, where you can rest your left leg. You want to be able to rest your left leg there to where it's comfortable. You're not putting an undue pressure on that. You're not having to use muscle effort to hold your leg up or push it down, and that you could do a long trip without being bothersome, and the seat is doing its job and gently holding your leg up at the thigh and adjusting it as such. With the right foot, especially if you're going to be on a long trip, you want to be able to hold the throttle pedal effectively in one position and just very carefully be able to maneuver it in the same manner as having your left leg up here, with comfort and without having to hold your foot up or down. Now, truth be told, there's a lot of cars out there that are not perfect, and you got to find the best place you can. I'm sure a lot of you guys are going to comment on weird examples. You have everything from trucks to sports cars to even motorcycles of how uncomfortable some things can be. And yeah, there's cars out there like that. But generally, that's what you want to find. And then lastly, you want to make sure that where your steering wheel is positioned, in this particular car, the steering wheel is fixed. Okay? You get into your steering wheel, because if you have to lift off the brake real fast, or excuse me, lift off the gas real fast and hit the brake, you see how my leg starts hitting the steering wheel here? That's a bit of a problem, because then you get into a problem like this. Let's say I was turning the wheel like this and I had to brake. My leg is actually hindered from being able to come up by my own hand. So one, I'm not able to get up here to the brake in time, but two, if I'm holding the wheel like this and I was like going to steer and had to hit the brake, my leg might actually hinder my ability to turn the wheel at that time. and that's not good. So in the circumstance of this car, I kind of have to find a position where I'm going to come back a little bit more. So my legs are like this. That's a little disappointing because it's a bit far away. Ah, that's better. That's kind of in between. Okay, so I can hit this, and I'm going to have to splay my legs out to drive it like this and get to where the steering wheel is sort of out of the way and develop that technique. It's a little frustrating, but that's the compromise for this car, is the clearance to the steering wheel. I have a feeling that might be why some people choose to put on an aftermarket steering wheel that is slightly narrower in diameter. It gives you a little more leg clearance. And for guys that are going to be a little more huskier, you're going to have a bit more difficulty with it. Fortunately, this car, you can put the seat a mile back. I mean, you could be, especially if you put it back, you could probably be 6'5" or more and still drive this car. But if you're a bit thinner. So that's one of the places where there's a compromise. So here's where I'm going to adjust it for there, and I'm still doing okay with the steering wheel. Now, with regard to the steering wheel, when you get the seat bottom place where you need to be forward and back, you can kind of fine tune it with your back. So let's say I was going to drive really sporty. I was going to be in an autocross where you need to see out really well, make very quick maneuvers with the hand. I'll actually sit up a little bit more upright. Typically, when you see World Rally Challenge drivers, they sit up rather upright. And the reason being is for a number of things. One, your visibility, you have best visibility. I can see everything the best. Whereas if I start leaning way back like a road racing car, you get down here and you're not going to be able to see down low. You can hit the apexes and you can find your spots if you're going fast, but you're like going like this if you want to see stuff close to you. So if you're driving around town or you're autocrossing or something like that, or you just don't want to lean back, it's perfectly fine to be sitting up, more up like this. You can see out. There's nothing to gain by leaning back. You don't look cooler if you're sitting back. I know there's a lot of guys that want to cruise and think they look cool, but whatever. You know, it's not ideal, okay? Let's just be honest. So you can sit up a little bit more. And if that's sort of the racier, or I'm an autocross way to go, your legs are going to be in the same position because they're still as efficient, right? But then you get into a point with your seat where you can just slightly adjust it depending on if you're going to be a long distance driving on the highway, which requires less inputs of the throttle and steering, but a little bit more comfort, at which point I might just put it back just a little bit. Just so you take that stress off your body and you're sort of reclining more and the seat is doing more of its work to support you. That way you get less fatigue and you can sit here still in an efficient position and drive long distances on the highway. So that's sort of how I get the seat to work well. My legs are able to do everything they need to as best as can be done with a bit of a compromise, you know, with regard to the steering and such. And then with regard to the seat back, I just adjust it a little forwards or back depending on what I'm going to be doing. So that's the first thing, seating position. The next thing, steering. The best place is 9.3, period. 9.3 is the most efficient place to have your hands. Doesn't matter if you're a street car driver or if you're a race car driver. The reason being is when you turn that wheel, if you're at 9.3, you have the ability to turn it more than 180 degrees with your arms not locking. I can turn it more than 180 degrees, probably a better part of 200 degrees. However, if I put it up to 10.2 like this, I'm only able to turn it 180 degrees. I can't get that extra little bit. So by putting it at 9.3, it's proof in the pudding that it is the most efficient place to put your hands. And frankly, it's the reason why any good manufacturer, when they design a steering wheel, designs the places for your hands with your thumbs to go at 9.3. Notice I say any good manufacturer. There's plenty of design places in a bureaucracy that make things that look pretty that are garbage. It's true. And it doesn't matter if it's a street car or a race car, and it doesn't matter if you're just out cruising and you're never going to go fast or not. I'm just talking about what is best and most efficient. So 9.3 is ideal. 10.2 I guess is okay if like you're trying to not be fatigued, but if you're being sporty or you want to be the safest, 9.3. Obviously on a highway, you might use your elbows like this, have both hands on the wheels, you're paying attention, you got both hands on it, you can still maneuver really well if you want. Oftentimes you might be doing this and checking it, but you still want one hand. If you get one hand on the wheel, it's best to be at either 9 or 3, because even with one hand, I can still correct a lot, if you have the strength to. Obviously, this is a car that is currently not running, so I don't have the power steering on. But if I can do that at 9, the position of 9, or the position of 3, I still have the opportunity to control it the best. I'll see a lot of people driving with one hand on the wheel like this. You can turn it quite a bit in some ways. Like for instance, if I put my left hand at 12 o'clock position, I can turn it down to 6 and a little bit past, so I get more than 180 degrees going to the left. But to the right, I'm only gonna get, gosh, I don't know, maybe 130 degrees. So that's not ideal. If I was at 9, I can turn it 200 degrees this way. I can turn it 180, 200 degrees this way. So when you have the choice between putting one hand on the wheel at 12 or one hand on the wheel at the bottom, you're always going to be best at either 9 or 3 if it's just one hand. And it's pretty terrible just to rest your wrist on this. That's, you know, you're not in a good position if something goes badly. Just throwing that out there. Obviously, a lot of people have done that. You get fatigued and you're just fine. But I'm just telling you guys what's ideal. So if you got to take one hand off the wheel, have your other one at 9 to 3. Ideally, both hands are at 9 to 3. 10 to is not as good, but eh. And then if you're a little tired, you know, 8 and 4 like this, if you're driving to be able to rest your elbows like this, going long distance on the highways is generally perfectly fine there too. Because you can always grab on like this and do something serious if you need to. But that's just generally how it goes. And for all of you that are going to go, well, Casey, you should always be at 9.3. You must be always attentive and looking like this in all times and means. Okay, first of all, if you're on the highway for hours and hours and hours, there's a certain fatigue level. That creates a lot of fatigue, which can lead to more dangerous situations. By being slightly relaxed, not having an overly tight grip on the wheel, and being able to rest your elbows in a car such as this with good position will keep you more alert for longer and, of course, safer. So that's the basics on steering. Going over to the shifter, the biggest thing is this. It doesn't matter if it's automatic or manual. This is for shifting gears. It is not a place to rest your hand. Okay. Now, the biggest reason for a manual transmission why you don't rest your hand there are twofold. One, you can't control the car with your hand just resting there. You control the car with your hands up here. Okay. And you have better control if you have both hands on the wheel. So you get your shift done, you put your hand back on the wheel. You get your shift done, you put your hand back on the wheel. If you just want to rest your arm, put it here. Hold on to the car. Do not make a habit of holding on to the shifter. And there's another reason more important than that. People that are big and ham-fisted, let's say I'm in fourth or second like this and I'm just holding on to it. If you were putting pressure on this, holding it back and not thinking of it, or worse yet, pushing it forward, you were actually wearing the internal components of your transmission. There's a shift fork that moves the, trying to think how I can, a shift fork that slides the dog engagement rings to change gears back and forth. So you may be wearing that, or worse yet, you're putting pressure on the synchro, like into gear, and wearing that out as you're driving, which is no good. Of course, if you're driving along and you're just gently, you know, like let's say your radio's up here and you kind of just go like this and you're tapping this and it's just putting pressure downward and you're not putting pressure forwards, back, left, or right, it's not gonna hurt anything, honestly, and I do that in some cars. But the reason people say don't put your hand here is, one, it's not a good technique for racing or even just driving the street. You should have your hands here to be able to control the car. And then twofold, you do have the opportunity to potentially wear out to some extent your transmission parts in your internals if you're not paying attention, you're just holding on or releasing it like that. So the best practice is just not to have your hand on the shifter at any time. Same holds true for an automatic. I know you can do that and hold on to it. You're not gonna hurt a darn thing. Those things are more locked into place, and as long as they're in the position, you don't have those same issues. But there's still no sense in doing it. You know, if you're pushing the radio and things, that's an okay place to rest your arm. Still better up here. And if you're relaxing, just don't be in the habit of putting your hand on the shifter. There's no need, and it's not the ideal thing. Okay, so we went over the seat, the steering wheel, the shifter, and we started to go over the pedals in regard to how the seat is. But with regard to the pedals, there's a lot of driving techniques I've done some other videos on with regard to shifting. And then like advanced shifting, toe heel down shifting, or heel toe shifting, depending on what you call it. And that's the ability to basically work all three pedals at once, to where you can be braking with the sort of big toe and index toe of your right foot, and then blip the gas pedal with kind of like your pinky toe like this, or your heel on a downshift to be able to match the RPMs to your next lower gear, so you're not just banging your clutch and slipping and slowing down the car. And those techniques, I think you're best served from looking into that video. But we largely went over this in regard to the seat, that you need to be able to control all the pedals really well without, one, getting so far back that you're pushing it with your toes and having a difficult time, or worse yet, you're super close to the steering wheel like this. Because if I was super close like this, because I needed to get the torque or I felt uncomfortable, one, in a modern car with an airbag, if you're too close to the airbag and that thing goes off, you're gonna get the impact in a bad way. It's supposed to go off and create a soft place for you to land. It's not supposed to go off and be like an explosion in your face. And that's the other aspect about steering that's very important. If you start steering like this and the steering wheel goes off, your arm is going to get blasted out of the way. That's why, generally speaking, when people drive, it's good to shuffle like this, because if the airbag goes off, your arms are not in the way to hit you in the face. And worse yet, the thing that we all talk about, and which is generally not a problem with modern cars or anything that has power steering, if a person is sitting close to the steering wheel because they need extra torque on it, those are likely the kind of people that will put their arm inside the steering wheel like this, because this gives you more leverage to be able to push down like this. You have more strength that way. The problem with that, of course, is if you have your arm here like this is in a position to likely be able to break your arm if the airbag was to go off, or if you've got a big metal watch on, smack you in the face. Not good. So on the street when you're driving, typically you'll be driving like this and shuffling and shifting the wheel like that. That's the proper way to drive on the street. Of course, when I showed you guys the 9 and 3 in all those positions, and I turned all the way to show you how far you can turn, it's an emergency situation or racing where the airbag does not come into play quite as much. If you have to go wham, wham really fast to avoid hitting somebody that like jumped out on the street or an accident, you do it. You don't go, oh, I better shuffle up, I just hit that person. No, do what you need to do to get it done. And that's why 9-3 is the best, because you have the best ability to turn the steering wheel the farthest with the best control. Okay, sorry, I got tangent. Anyway, with regard to the pedals, if you get way up here like this because you need torque to control it, your legs and everything start crowding and it's really hard. You got to lift your whole leg up to hit the pedals, which doesn't give you the finite control. And what I mean to say by finite control is your heels need to rest on the ground, because if your heels are resting on the ground, you can push with your leg, right? But you also have the ability to have a solid base with your heel to push it. If your heels are up in the air, you're using the muscles in your leg to hold it up, and you don't have as good a control. It's kind of like in art and painting. If I have a paintbrush and I want to be really delicate and really precise, I may put my hand like this on the canvas so that I can just go like this and work with my wrist, because I have a solid base. If I'm just trying to do it here in tiny things, it's easier to be shaky, unless of course you're doing something big and you're striping with your arm. I hope that makes sense. Or if somebody is cutting out sheet metal, you need to have an edge. Or if you're turning a wrench, you're pushing on something, you got to brace your body against it. You can have better control. So it's the same kind of thing. You want to be able to have your heels, generally speaking, on the ground, because by having your heels on the ground to be able to work the pedals, you have better control of what you're doing. So keep that in mind. Now lastly, and this is kind of my favorite fun little tip, because it's easy and it's something nobody ever thinks of, the mirrors. Okay? Now, when you get in a car that somebody shorter had just driven and you're taller, or vice versa, obviously the mirrors have to adjust as well. But the most common mistake about mirrors is how people adjust their side mirrors. Now, I hope you guys can get this. Obviously you have a rear view mirror and you have two side view mirrors. The rear view mirror is easy. You point that thing right straight down the lane you're in the road, to when you have your head like this, you can see it really well, okay? Very simple. But the place where people go wrong are their side view mirrors. Generally speaking, the vast majority of people adjust the side view mirrors so you can see the side of your car, which is comforting because it gives you a frame of reference to know what you're looking at. And also, generally speaking, I think the majority of people like to be able to see the cars behind them in the side view mirrors. But I have to point something out. This is called a rear view mirror, and these are called side view mirrors for a reason. If you have your side view mirrors adjusted so you're looking at the same picture that you were looking at with your rear view mirrors, that means you are losing visibility. You're leaving it on the table and you're creating blind spots. Generally speaking, if you adjust your mirrors properly, a car will have no blind spots or very little. And how you do that is this. Generally speaking, especially when you're sitting, I'm going to adjust this rear view mirror now, and without turning my head, I'm going to have my head exactly where it's going to be, like I'm driving down the road. And I look at the rearview mirror without turning my head. So I look at the rearview mirror, and I can see right here a point on that building behind me that I'm looking here. Okay, there's a stain on the building right at my edge, and I can see the stain here. My rearview mirror right now, let's see if I do this right. I got to turn it on. My rearview mirror is overlapping too much, so I'm going to adjust it. There we go. So, like, if this is the visibility of my rearview mirror and this is the visibility of my side view mirror, you don't want them to overlap. See how there's visibility here? You want to adjust that side view mirror so they just barely overlap, or they come here. Because this way you gain all this extra view on the side of the vehicle. And right now, I can see so much more on the side that if a car starts coming up behind me, I can look in the rear view mirror and see it, and by the time it goes out of my field of vision on my side view mirror, it's now in my peripheral vision just out the side, and I can see it. So I've eliminated that blind spot. The same for over here. So right now, if I look at that rear view mirror, I can see just past the side of that building to a telephone pole. So I'm going to switch it over, and I'm going to adjust this to where I just see the telephone pole. Now I've got that adjusted well. And even I didn't have it adjusted properly. I wasn't looking down the side of my car, that is the typical, but I was able to gain that much more visibility from what I've done. And I know for all of you, if you try that, first of all, you got to do it right. Don't go blaming me if you screw everything up and back into something, okay? You got to do what works for you. You got to be smart. Test it when there's no people around. Take responsibility for yourself and your own actions, okay, America? So anyway, I can adjust this so I can see more. And when you get accustomed to driving with your rearview mirrors adjusted properly, you'll never be able to go back because you realize how blind you actually are. Anyway, guys, some of the guys are back here now, so I got to get back to work. I hope you've enjoyed this. These are just some of the basic tips, very helpful for a newer person. I think some of them might help you out that have been driving for a long time too. Of course, not trying to think I'm super cool here. This is just what I've learned. Obviously, I love driving, I love racing, and I think these things are very helpful for everybody that frankly just don't get talked about. So hope it was helpful, and until then, until next time, see you guys around.